Inside that glass mountain, hidden for 43 years, sat $265 million in art and gold. But Theodora and Vincent Ashford didn't know that when they received the keys on a cold Wednesday in March. They only knew they had 72 hours to find somewhere, anywhere, to live. Because their children, who'd been silent for 31 months, suddenly wanted guardianship. But we'll get to that. First, you need to understand how poor they were. March 12th, 2024. Theodora and Vincent Ashford sat on a cot in the Mercy Covenant Church basement, counting money. $1,267.84. That's all they had left after 51 years of marriage, after raising 3 children, after working 72 combined years. Thea's fingers, thin and spotted with age, separated the bills into stacks on the rough wool blanket. 300s, 11 20s, 16 10s, the rest in 5s and 1s. The coins clinked in an old coffee tin. Quarters, dimes, nickels, pennies, counted to the exact cent. Because when you have this little, every penny is the difference between eating and not eating. The room was 8 feet by 10. Concrete walls painted institutional beige decades ago, now water-stained and peeling. One small window at ground level showed feet passing on the sidewalk outside. The cot where they slept was donated. The frame bent slightly, so it wobbled when either of them moved. 2 milk crates served as their dresser, holding everything they owned. 3 changes of clothes each, a few toiletries, Vince's heart medication that he'd been splitting in half to make it last, Thea's cancer follow-up appointment notices she couldn't afford to keep. The bathroom was down the hall, shared with whoever else needed emergency shelter that week. At night, the boiler clanged and hissed through pipes that ran along the ceiling, too hot to touch, but never quite warming the room enough. Pastor Reynolds had been kind. When they'd shown up on February 1st, homeless after living in their car through an Iowa winter that regularly hit 15 below zero, he'd given them this space without question. But kindness has limits. Yesterday, he'd pulled Thea aside after the morning service. A young family had just lost their apartment, 3 kids under 7. The church needed the room. He was sorry, so sorry. They had until Friday, 72 hours. Thea folded the money back into an envelope, her movements precise despite the tremor that had started in her hands during chemotherapy and never quite left. 72. She'd taught high school literature for 34 years. She knew what numbers could mean beyond their mathematical value. 72 hours. 3 days. The time it took Phileas Fogg to cross the Atlantic. The time Romeo and Juliet knew each other before they died. In 72 hours, if they didn't find somewhere to go, Nathaniel would file for conservatorship. Her son. Her firstborn. The child she'd carried for 9 months and raised for 48 years would have a judge declare her and Vince incompetent. Would split them up. Send Vince to one facility, send her to another. After 51 years of sleeping in the same bed, of breathing the same air, of existing as 2 parts of one whole, they would die separately, in rooms that smelled of disinfectant and defeat. Vince sat on the edge of the cot, shoulders curved forward, hands clasped between his knees. He'd been a big man once. 6'2", broad-shouldered, the kind of physical presence that made him natural at protecting things. 38 years at Boeing, designing systems that kept aircraft from falling out of the sky. Now, he was thin in a way that looked wrong, his button-down shirt hanging loose where muscle used to fill it out. The scar from his bypass surgery showed above his collar, a pink line climbing toward his jaw. His hands still had the calluses from decades of working with tools, but they shook slightly when he was tired, which was most of the time now. He didn't say anything. They'd been married long enough that silence could carry entire conversations. Thea knew what he was thinking. The same thing she was thinking. The same thing they'd thought every night since February 14th, when they'd called all three of their children and gotten voicemail. Full voicemail. As if they'd let the messages pile up deliberately so their parents couldn't even leave a plea for help. The only response had come 2 days later.
A check for $200 from Elliot, their youngest, with a note written in handwriting that shook worse than Thea's tremor.
Mom and Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm not strong enough. I don't know what to do. Jonathan and Clarissa, I'm afraid of them. This is all I have. I'm sorry. Elliot. They'd cashed it, used it for food, hated themselves for needing it. The church basement had one overhead light, a fluorescent tube that buzzed constantly and flickered every few minutes.
It had been flickering for 4 months now.
Thea had stopped noticing. She'd stopped noticing a lot of things. How her clothes hung on her frame because they couldn't afford to eat more than $12 of food a day between them. How Vince limped slightly on cold mornings because his knee joints ached, and they'd stopped buying the over-the-counter anti-inflammatories. How she sometimes forgot words mid-sentence, her brain still foggy from the chemotherapy, or maybe from the stress. Or maybe from the simple fact that at 72 years old, living in a church basement, counting your last $1,000, the mind starts looking for exits. They'd thought about it. The exits. March 8th, 4 days ago. They'd walked to the 6th Avenue Bridge over the Cedar River, 2 in the morning, when the streets were empty and the water ran black below.
They'd stood there for 2 hours, Thea's head on Vince's shoulder, his arm around her waist. Both of them looking down at the water and thinking the same thing neither would say. How easy it would be. How quick. How they'd be together at the end, which was all they'd wanted. Vince had been the one to step back first, his voice rough. We're not doing this. Not like this. Not letting them win. Them. Their children. The children they'd sacrificed everything for. Thea had taught Nathaniel to read using flashcards she'd made by hand because they couldn't afford the expensive phonics programs. She'd stayed up until midnight helping Clarissa with college applications to 17 different schools. She'd driven Elliot to art lessons 40 minutes each way, twice a week, for 6 years. Vince had worked overtime for 8 years straight to pay for 3 college educations without loans. They'd given everything. Time, money, sleep, dreams they'd had for themselves. Given it willingly, happily, because that's what parents do. And now those children were petitioning to have them declared incompetent. The irony was so sharp it drew blood. Thea picked up the envelope of money again, feeling its weight. $1,267.84. They owed the hospital $120,700. $78,400 for Thea's cancer treatment.
$42,300 for Vince's emergency bypass surgery. The collection calls came 3-4 times a day to the prepaid phone they shared. They'd stopped answering. What was the point? They couldn't pay, would never be able to pay. The debt would follow them to their graves, and probably beyond, the hospital sending bills to whatever address they died at, expecting corpses to write checks.
The medical debt was only part of it. They'd lost their house. 2847 Oakmont Drive. Bought in 1987 when Nathaniel was 11, Clarissa was 8, Elliot was 5. A 3-bedroom ranch with a backyard big enough for a swing set and a vegetable garden. Thea had taught herself to can tomatoes in that kitchen. Vince had built a workshop in the garage. They'd painted every room themselves, changed the flooring twice, replaced the roof once. 37 years of mortgage payments. 37 years of memories soaked into the walls. Gone. Foreclosed last November when the bank called in the loan that Nathaniel had taken out against the house without telling them. Used their home as collateral for his high-risk investment schemes.
lost everything. The letter Thea had written him when the foreclosure notice came had been 4 pages long, handwritten because she'd wanted him to see the effort, the care, the hope that he'd understand what he'd taken from them. She'd explained how that house was where they'd raised him, where they'd celebrated every Christmas, every birthday, every milestone, where his father had taught him to ride a bike in the driveway, where his mother had helped him study for the LSATs at the kitchen table, where they'd planned to grow old and die. The letter had come back marked Return to Sender. Addressee, unknown. He'd moved, changed addresses, hadn't told them. They'd tried calling. The number you are calling is not accepting calls from this caller. He'd blocked them. For what? For asking him to explain how he'd lost $180,000 of their retirement savings? For wanting to know how their home had gotten wrapped up in his investment schemes? For existing as evidence of his failure? Thea had been a teacher long enough to understand human nature. She'd watched thousands of teenagers over 3 decades, seen how shame curdles into anger, how guilt transforms into blame. Nathaniel couldn't face what he'd done to them, so he'd eliminated them. Simple, efficient. Very much in character for a man who'd built his career on finding loopholes in intellectual property law. The fluorescent light flickered, steadied, flickered again. Vince finally spoke, his voice quiet in the small room. "We should try to sleep." Thea looked at the cot, at the thin mattress with the spring poking through near the bottom left corner where Vince's feet went, at the donated sheets that were clean but worn so thin you could see through them in places, at the 2 flat pillows that smelled faintly of someone else's shampoo. She wasn't tired. Her body was exhausted. Constant ache in her bones from the cancer treatment. The kind of tiredness that sleep never quite touched. But her mind raced. Tomorrow was Wednesday. They needed to figure out what to do, where to go, how to disappear before Nathaniel filed his paperwork Friday at noon. They couldn't fight him in court, couldn't afford a lawyer, and even if they could, the facts were damning. They were 72 and 74 years old, living in a church basement, $1,200 to their name, medical debt they'd never pay, no permanent address, no income beyond Social Security that got eaten by medical bills the moment it hit their account. Any judge would look at those facts and agree. Clearly, these people need help managing their affairs. The cruelty was in the word help. Nathaniel wasn't trying to help them. He was trying to control them. And if there was no them left to control, if they had nothing, then why the sudden interest? Why now, after 31 months of silence? The answer walked through Thea's mind in Vince's engineer-precise voice. Because he's heard something, knows something, wants something. But what? They had nothing left to take. Vince reached over and took her hand. His palm was rough, warm, solid. 51 years of that hand in hers. 51 years of facing things together. His thumb traced circles on her wrist, the gesture automatic, comforting, old as their marriage. He'd been 24 when they married. She'd been 22. June 16th, 1973. A small ceremony at Cedar Rapids Methodist. Her parents hadn't approved.
Thought she should finish her master's degree first.
Thought Vince was too quiet, too serious, not ambitious enough. They'd been wrong about everything except the serious part. Vince was serious, careful. The kind of man who read instruction manuals cover to cover and kept receipts organized in labeled folders. The kind of man who'd worked the same job for 38 years because loyalty mattered more than advancement. The kind of man who, when his wife was diagnosed with cancer and they were 72 years old and terrified,
sat beside her hospital bed for 16 hours straight, only leaving when the nurses physically escorted him out. Thea squeezed his hand. "Tomorrow," she said. "We'll figure something out tomorrow." But tomorrow came without answers. Wednesday morning, March 13th. Thea woke at 5:30 to the sound of the boiler clanging to life. Vince was already awake beside her, staring at the ceiling. Neither of them had slept well. They never did anymore. At this age, sleep came in fragments, broken by bathroom trips and aching joints, and the constant low hum of anxiety that was their lives now. They got up, got dressed, Vince in one of his 2 remaining button-downs, navy blue, collar frayed, Thea in a cardigan and slacks that had been good quality once, but now showed their age in the way the fabric had thinned at the elbows and knees. They washed their faces in the shared bathroom, brushed their teeth, avoided looking too closely at the mirror, because mirrors showed truths that were hard to face at 5:30 in the morning. Breakfast was oatmeal from a bulk bag they'd bought at the discount grocer, $2.49 for enough oats to last a week if they were careful. Thea cooked it in the church kitchen, adding water instead of milk because milk cost too much, adding nothing else because sugar and fruit were luxuries. They ate standing up at the counter, sharing one bowl between them because it meant one less dish to wash. The oatmeal was bland, gluey, but it filled their stomachs. After breakfast, Thea walked to the Cedar Rapids Public Library. She'd been making this walk every morning for 4 months. 2.3 miles from the church to the library, past neighborhoods that looked nothing like the one where she and Vince used to live. Past houses with Christmas decorations still up in March. Past the elementary school where she'd taught for 34 years, where her replacement was probably sitting in her old classroom right now, probably using the lesson plans Thea had developed over decades and left behind when she retired. The library opened at 9. Thea arrived at 8:45 and waited on the steps with the handful of other people who needed the library for reasons beyond books. The homeless man who came for the bathrooms, the elderly woman who came for the heat, the teenager who came because their home wasn't safe. Thea knew them all by sight now. They knew her. They didn't speak. What was there to say? At 9, the doors opened. Thea went straight to the computer station in the back corner, the one partially hidden by the reference stacks where she had some privacy. She'd been a teacher. She knew how to research, knew how to dig through information until she found what she needed. 4 months of coming here every day, and she'd become an expert in things she'd never wanted to know. How to apply for emergency housing assistance, how to find free medical clinics, how to navigate bankruptcy law, how to make $1,000 last until what? There was no until, just an endless present of not enough. But today, something was different. The girl at the computer next to Thea's was maybe 26, 27. Red hair pulled back in a messy bun, freckles across her nose, wearing a threadbare Iowa State hoodie and jeans with holes that weren't fashionable. She had 3 architecture textbooks spread around her computer, a spiral notebook covered in sketches, and the kind of exhausted determination in her eyes that Thea recognized from 34 years of teaching. Their eyes met. The girl smiled, tentative. Thea smiled back. The girl's name was Greer Callahan, and she was living in her car. Thea learned this over coffee at the shop 2 blocks from the library, the kind of place that sold $12 lattes to college kids who didn't know what actual poverty looked like. Thea had $1.50 in her pocket after breakfast, enough for a small drip coffee if she asked for it black and didn't tip. Greer had even less, so they split 1 coffee between them, passing the paper cup back and forth across the small table, while Greer talked and Thea listened. Greer had been kicked out 8 months ago. Her parents found out she was dating a woman. Her father was a deacon at their church. Her mother taught Sunday school. They'd given her a choice: conversion therapy or leave.
She'd left, moved into her car, dropped out of Iowa State with 1 semester left in her architecture degree because she couldn't afford tuition without her parents' help. Now she worked part-time at the library shelving books for $12 an hour, 20 hours a week. $240 every 2 weeks, minus taxes. Not enough to rent even a room. Barely enough to keep gas in her car and eat once a day. Thea recognized the sharp edges of Greer's story, the way shame and hurt had been compressed into something hard and bright, the way her hands shook slightly when she talked about her parents, the same way Thea's hands shook when she thought about her children. "We're the same," Thea said. "Nobody wants us." Greer's eyes filled. She looked away, blinking hard. When she looked back, something had shifted. A recognition. An alliance forming between 2 people who'd been declared expendable by the people who were supposed to love them. They walked back to the library together. Greer had to return to work. Thea went back to her computer. But before she could log in, Greer appeared beside her, carrying her laptop. "I can help you," Greer said, "with whatever you're researching. I'm pretty good at finding information." Thea started to say no. Started to protect her privacy the way she'd been protecting it for months, not letting anyone see how far she'd fallen. But something in Greer's face stopped her. The genuine offer of help. The understanding that sometimes strangers are safer than family because strangers don't have the power to hurt you the way family does. "I need to check my email," Thea said. "The forwarding service from my old address." Greer pulled up the email portal, helped Thea navigate the interface because computers weren't Thea's strength. They sorted through the inbox. 47 spam messages, 3 from collection agencies, and 1 from Feldman and Associates, estate attorneys, Denver, Colorado. Thea's cursor hovered over it. Her heart was doing something strange in her chest. A flutter that might have been anxiety, or might have been the first touch of hope in so long she'd forgotten what it felt like. She clicked. "Dear Mrs. Theodora Ashford, we regret to inform you of the passing of your husband's aunt, Vera Sullivan Blackwood, at age 96. As the last living relative on the Sullivan line, you and Mr. Vincent Ashford are the sole beneficiaries of her estate. The primary asset is a residential property known as the Glass Mountain House, located at 14 Glacier View Road, Aspen, Colorado. The property has been unoccupied for 43 years. Please contact our office within 10 business days to claim the inheritance. After this period, the estate will escheat to the state of Colorado. Sincerely, Howard Feldman, Esquire." Thea read it twice. 3 times. The words wouldn't settle into meaning. Vera Sullivan Blackwood. She searched her memory. Vince's family had been small. His parents both dead, no siblings. Aunts and uncles mostly gone or out of touch. Vera. A flash of memory. A woman at Vince's parents' wedding anniversary party. 1973, maybe 74. Tall, thin, dressed all in black, standing alone by the window. Someone had whispered that she was eccentric, an artist, lived in New York, didn't talk to the family. Thea had never met her again. 51 years of marriage, and she'd completely forgotten Vera existed. Greer was reading over her shoulder. Her breath caught. "Mrs. Ashford, do you know what property in Aspen is worth?" Thea shook her head. Greer's fingers flew over her laptop keyboard. She pulled up real estate listings. Aspen, Colorado. Even small cabins are selling for $2–3 million right now. If this property is... She stopped, searched for the Glass Mountain House. Nothing. Searched public records. Found a deed transfer to Vera Sullivan Blackwood, 1981. Found tax records showing $847 per year paid through 2024. found absolutely nothing else. No photographs, no building permits.
No mentions in local news beyond one article from 1981. Eccentric New York artist purchases mountain property. Plans glass sanctuary. Locals skeptical.
What does that mean? Thea asked. Glass sanctuary. Greer's eyes were wide. I don't know. But Mrs. Ashford, if this property exists, if it's been sitting there for 43 years, if nobody knows about it, her voice dropped. You might have just inherited something significant. Significant.
The word hung between them like a soap bubble. Beautiful. Fragile. Probably about to burst. Thea's mind was racing through practicalities. Colorado was how far? 12, 13 hours driving? They didn't have a car. Sold it 3 months ago for $800 that went straight to medical bills. They couldn't afford a bus ticket. Couldn't afford gas for a borrowed car. Couldn't afford the cheap motel they'd need to stay in overnight.
We have no way to get there, Thea said.
Greer looked at her for a long moment. Then, my car runs. I'll drive you. I have to work until 5, but we could leave early tomorrow morning. Be there by nightfall.
Why would you do that?
Because I study architecture. Because I want to see what a glass sanctuary built by an eccentric artist in 1981 looks like. And because... Greer's voice softened. You bought me coffee when you only had enough for one. Sometimes that matters more than family. Thea felt something crack in her chest. Something that had been frozen for 31 months. She reached across the table and took Greer's hand. The girl's fingers were cold, thin, the nails bitten short, just like Thea's, just like Vince's, just like everyone who'd been discarded and told they didn't matter.
Thank you,
Thea said. That evening she told Vince. He was skeptical. They didn't know this girl. Didn't know if the property was real. Didn't know if they were walking into something worse than what they had, which was nothing, which meant anything could be worse. But Thea watched his face as she read him the email, watched the way his engineer's mind started working through the problem, watched the way his shoulders straightened slightly, the first time in months she'd seen him sit up straight. Watched hope flicker across his features before he could shut it down. Our children we've known 48 years abandoned us, Thea said. Greer we've known 3 hours offered help. Sometimes strangers are better than family. Vince was quiet. Then, when do we leave? Tomorrow morning, early. They spent the evening packing. It took 10 minutes. Everything they owned fit in 2 grocery bags and 1 small suitcase Vince had salvaged from the house before the bank took it. They folded their 3 changes of clothes each, packed Vince's hot medication and the pill splitter he used to make it last twice as long. Packed Thea's cancer follow-up appointment notices that she'd been collecting, even though she couldn't keep the appointments. Packed the envelope with $1,267.84. Packed the photograph of their 3 children, taken at Clarissa's college graduation, before everything fell apart, when they'd still been a family. Thea looked at that photograph for a long time. Nathaniel smiling with his arm around his father. Clarissa holding her diploma. Elliot making a silly face at the camera. All of them young and happy and loved. When had it changed? When had love become conditional? When had their worth as parents become measured in dollars and convenience? She didn't know. Maybe there wasn't a when. Maybe it had always been this way, and she'd been too busy loving them to notice they didn't love her back. Not really. Not the way love should be. Unconditional, steadfast. The kind of love that doesn't disappear when things get hard. Vince found her standing there, photo in hand. He took it from her gently, looked at it, put it back in the suitcase. We're not dead yet, he said.
Wednesday night, they barely slept.
Lay on the cot, listening to the boiler and the sound of their own breathing, and thinking about glass sanctuaries and eccentric artists, and whether hope was something you could afford when you had $1,267.84 to your name. Thursday morning, March 14th, 6 a.m. Greer's car would have been here by now, but she'd texted late last night, "Can we leave 10 a.m. instead? Need to handle something at work." Thea had agreed. 3 more hours in the church basement. 3 more hours of waiting. They used the time to say goodbye to Pastor Reynolds, to thank him for 4 months of shelter, to leave a $50 donation they couldn't afford but felt compelled to give. The pastor hugged them both, wished them luck, told them they'd always have a place here if they needed it. Thea knew he meant it. Also knew they'd never come back. Forward was the only direction left. At 9:40, they were loading their bags into the church hallway when a black sedan pulled up outside. Expensive. The kind of car that cost more than Thea and Vince had earned in a year when they were working. Nathaniel stepped out. 31 months. 940 days. Not one visit. Not one phone call. Not one text beyond those 10 words when Vince was having his heart cut open. "Dad will be fine. I'm in deposition." Now he was here, wearing a suit that probably cost $2,000, carrying a leather briefcase, looking at his parents like they were a problem to be solved. "Mom? Dad? We need to talk." Thea's entire body went cold. Then hot. Then cold again. Beside her, Vince had gone very still, the way he got when he was trying to control his anger. "How did you know we were here?" Thea asked. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. Flat. Hard. "I hired an investigator. I was worried." 31 months you were worried. Nathaniel ignored that, looked past them into the church hallway at their packed bags. "You're leaving. Where are you going?" "None of your concern." "Actually, it is my concern. I heard you received correspondence about an estate in Colorado, a property from Aunt Vera." Silence. Thea felt her heart hammering. How did he know? The email had come yesterday. How could he possibly know already? "You're monitoring our email," she said. It wasn't a question. "I maintained access when I was managing your financial affairs. For your protection. Look, let's be realistic here. Dad's 74. You're 72. Mom, you just finished cancer treatment. Dad has heart issues. You're living in a church basement. Clearly, you can't manage complex financial matters on your own anymore." Thea took a step forward. She was 5'3". Nathaniel was 6 feet tall. But she drew herself up to her full height and looked him in the eye and spoke in the voice she'd used to control classrooms full of teenagers for 34 years. "No. You don't get to call us Mom and Dad. You don't get to show up in your $2,000 suit after 940 days of silence because you heard we might inherit something. We are not asking your permission. We are informing you. Stay away from us." Nathaniel's face hardened. The mask of concern cracked. Underneath was something cold. Calculated. "I've already consulted with attorneys about conservatorship. Clarissa agrees. Given your situation, homeless, significant debt, no stable living arrangement, any judge would agree you need help managing your affairs. I'm giving you a chance to cooperate voluntarily, to let family help you. But if you refuse, we'll file the paperwork. Friday, noon. You have 72 hours to reconsider." Vince spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet, but carried the weight of 38 years of keeping aircraft from falling out of the sky. "Get out.
Now. Nathaniel didn't move. Whatever's in Colorado, whatever Aunt Vera left, that's family property, Sullivan Line assets. Any competent attorney will argue it should be distributed among all heirs, not just two elderly people who can't manage it responsibly. He got back in his car. But before he drove away, he rolled down the window. One more thing. I know you're planning to leave town. Don't think distance will protect you. Conservatorship can be filed in any state, and once it's granted, you'll have no say in where you live or how the estate is managed. Think about that. Then he was gone, black sedan disappearing around the corner, leaving behind the smell of expensive cologne and the cold certainty of legal threats. Thea stood there shaking, not from fear, from rage, from the sheer audacity of a man who'd stolen their life savings, lost their home, abandoned them for 31 months, and now wanted to control whatever might save them. Greer pulled up 20 minutes later in her Honda Civic, saw their faces, saw the tension. What happened? Nathaniel, Vince, was already loading bags into the trunk. We need to leave, now. They pulled away from Mercy Covenant Church at 11:15 a.m. on Thursday, March 14th, 2024. 57 hours before Nathaniel's conservatorship deadline. 13 hours of driving to reach a property that might not exist. $1,267.84 between survival and complete ruin. And absolutely no idea what waited for them at 14 Glacier View Road, Aspen, Colorado. Greer drove west. The sun climbed high as they left Iowa behind. Vince sat in the front passenger seat, silent, watching the landscape roll past. Thea sat in back, Greer's laptop open, researching everything she could find about Vera Sullivan Blackwood. There wasn't much. One obituary in the New York Times, published March 2nd. Vera Sullivan Blackwood, 96, passed peacefully in Denver. Reclusive artist and collector. Known in underground art circles, 1960s and 70s. One exhibition at Whitney Museum, 1967. Then complete withdrawal from public life. No children, no close family. Greer found one more article. Aspen Times, September 1981. Local residents skeptical of New York artist's plan to build glass sanctuary on remote mountain property. Sullivan Blackwood, recently relocated from Manhattan, has purchased 17 acres at 14 Glacier View Road. Architect declined to comment on building plans. Property accessible only by unpaved road. That was all. 43 years of silence. No photographs of the house. No permits on file. No mention in any architectural publications. As if Vera had built her sanctuary and then erased it from public record. Why, Thea wondered. What was she hiding? Or who was she hiding from? The miles rolled past. Iowa became Nebraska, became Colorado. Greer drove steadily, stopping once for gas that she paid for with a credit card that was probably already maxed out. Stopping once for bathroom breaks at a rest area where they split a $5 sandwich from a vending machine between the three of them. They didn't talk much. What was there to say? They were three people society had decided didn't matter. An elderly couple, one medical emergency from death. A queer girl, sleeping in her car, racing toward a property that might be their salvation, or might be nothing at all. The sun was setting when they crossed into the mountains. The landscape changed from plains to foothills to peaks that clawed at the sky. Greer's Civic struggled with the altitude, engine laboring on the switchbacks, but it kept going, kept climbing. They reached Aspen as darkness fell. The town looked like something from a postcard. Mountain peaks sharp against the purple sky, expensive shops lining the streets. People in ski gear drinking wine at outdoor cafes despite the March chill.
Money everywhere. Casual, abundant. The kind of wealth that never worried about splitting sandwiches or rationing medication. They found a cheap motel on the edge of town. $89 for a room with 2 double beds. Greer paid again, waving off Thea's protests. They needed to save every cent they had. That night, lying in a real bed for the first time in 4 months, Thea couldn't sleep. Tomorrow they'd call Howard Feldman. Tomorrow they'd find out if the inheritance was real. Tomorrow their lives would either change or end. She stared at the ceiling, thinking about glass sanctuaries and children who'd forgotten how to love, and the strange mercy of strangers. Thinking about how sometimes the people who save you are the ones you've known for 3 hours, not the ones you've known for 48 years. Beside her, Vince breathed slow and steady. In the other bed, Greer was already out, exhausted from 13 hours of driving. Thea reached over and found Vince's hand in the dark. He squeezed back. 51 years of that hand in hers. 51 years of holding on. Whatever came tomorrow, they'd face it together, the way they'd faced everything since June 16th, 1973. And maybe, just maybe, Vera's sanctuary would be real. Maybe there was still a place in this world for people like them. The lost, the discarded, the ones who refused to give up. Thea closed her eyes, listened to Vince breathing, listened to Greer's soft snore from the other bed, listened to the sound of hope, fragile as glass, bright as mountain light, finally allowing itself to exist again. Friday morning, March 15th. Thea woke at 5:30 to darkness and the sound of Vince already moving around the motel room. Her body ached in places she'd stopped cataloging months ago. Sleep had come in fragments, broken by dreams of glass houses shattering and Nathaniel's face twisted in triumph. Today was the deadline. Noon. 6.5 hours from now, her son would walk into a courthouse and file paperwork declaring his parents incompetent. Would ask a judge to give him control of their lives, their decisions, whatever assets they might have, including whatever waited at 14 Glacier View Road. If anything waited there at all. Greer was already up, laptop open, studying satellite images of the area around Aspen. The screen's blue light made her face look younger, more vulnerable. She'd been awake when Thea went to the bathroom at 3 a.m. Probably hadn't slept much either. 3 people, running from different versions of the same abandonment, gambling everything on a property that might be nothing more than a collapsed cabin full of 43 years of mountain weather. They were at Howard Feldman's office by 8. The building was downtown Aspen, sandwiched between an art gallery and a boutique selling $1,000 ski jackets. Feldman and Associates occupied the 2nd floor, reached by stairs that made Vince's knee joint pop with each step. The waiting room had leather chairs, and a receptionist who looked at their thrift store clothes with the particular kind of politeness that was really judgment. Thea felt Vince stiffen beside her, that familiar tension in his shoulders that meant he was absorbing the unspoken dismissal and converting it into something harder. Greer just looked around with the frank interest of someone studying the architecture, taking in the exposed beams and the way natural light fell through the skylight. Howard Feldman came out to greet them himself. 65, maybe older, with white hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He shook their hands with genuine warmth, ushered them into his office, offered coffee that Thea accepted because free caffeine was free caffeine, and they'd need it for whatever came next. His office overlooked the street. Through the window, Aspen went about its expensive morning. People in athletic wear heading to yoga classes, tourists with ski equipment, money moving through the world like water, abundant and thoughtless. Feldman sat behind his desk, pulled out a file folder thick with documents.
I have to admit, I'm relieved you came. Vera was very specific that if her heirs didn't claim the property within 10 days, it should go to the state. She had no interest in distant relatives fighting over her estate. Did you know her well? Thea asked. Not well. I managed her affairs for 20 years, but we only met in person 3 times. She was intensely private. Paid me retainer fees to handle property taxes, utilities, basic maintenance, but she never discussed the house itself, never invited me to see it. You've never been there? Never. The property is unusual. Vera designed it with an architect from New York who specialized in experimental structures. Building permit filed in 1981, construction completed by 83. After that, nothing. She lived there alone until about 15 years ago, then moved to Denver for health reasons. The house has been empty since 2009. 15 years empty. Thea tried to imagine what 15 Colorado winters would do to a building. Snow, ice, wind, animals. The slow, patient work of nature reclaiming what humans had built. What kind of condition is it in? Feldman spread his hands in uncertainty. I honestly don't know. The property management company does annual exterior inspections, makes sure the structure is sound, keeps the access road marginally passable. But they've never been inside. Vera was very clear. No one enters the house. She had a security system installed, very sophisticated for its time. Why all the secrecy? That I can't tell you. Vera's instructions were explicit but unexplained. She wanted the property maintained but undisturbed. And she wanted it to go to family when she died, specifically to her brother's descendants. That's you. Feldman pulled an envelope from the file. She left this, to be given to whoever inherited. He handed it across the desk. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive paper, sealed with red wax that had Vera's initial pressed into it. 5. Thea broke the seal carefully, pulled out a single sheet in handwriting that was elegant and precise. To whoever inherits this. I built this house in 1981 as a sanctuary from a world that didn't understand me. I filled it with the only things I ever loved: beauty, light, and silence. If you're here, you probably need sanctuary too. Take it. Use it. It was meant for the lost. The house will protect you, if you let it. Don't let them find what's inside until you understand what it means. The beauty is not in the having, but in the seeing. Trust the structure. Trust yourselves. Trust that some things are worth protecting, even from family. Especially from family. Vera. Vince leaned over to read it. His finger traced the last line. Especially from family. Feldman cleared his throat. I should mention, there have been inquiries about the property. Someone called yesterday afternoon asking about the estate, about whether it had been claimed yet. They didn't leave a name, but the number had a Boston area code. Boston. Where Nathaniel lived. He already knows. Vince's voice was flat. He's already planning. Feldman's expression tightened with something like distaste. Estate law is complex. If someone wanted to challenge your inheritance, they'd need to prove standing, family relationship. But that process takes time, months, usually. For now, the property is legally yours. I have the deed transfer papers ready. You just need to sign. Thea signed. Vince signed. Greer witnessed. Feldman notarized. 17 minutes and they owned a house they'd never seen, in a town they'd never lived in, inherited from a woman they'd met once. Feldman handed over 2 keys. One was modern, a black plastic key card with a magnetic strip. The other was brass, old-fashioned, the kind that belonged to a Victorian mansion or a Gothic novel. For different locks? The main entrance uses the key card. It's connected to the security system. The brass key is for interior doors. Vera didn't explain which ones.
He also gave them a folder with property documents, tax records, utility account information, and a hand-drawn map showing the route to 14 Glacier View Road. The property is 17 miles west of town. You'll take Highway 82 for 12 miles, then turn onto Forest Service Road 314. That's where the pavement ends. The final 5 miles are rough. You'll need four-wheel drive, especially this time of year. Snowmelt makes the road unstable. Thea looked at Greer's Honda Civic with its duct-taped bumper and 220,000 miles.
We don't have four-wheel drive.
Feldman hesitated. Then, I have a truck you can borrow. 1998 Chevy. It's old but reliable. I use it for fishing trips. He pulled keys from his desk drawer. Consider it part of my service to the estate. Bring it back when you can.
Why are you helping us? Vince asked.
Because Vera trusted me to make sure her wishes were honored. And because I've practiced law for 40 years. I know what inheritance disputes look like. I know what happens when families fight over money. And I know that Vera specifically wanted her house to go to people who needed it. That's you. They took the truck, transferred their few belongings from Greer's car. Thea climbed into the passenger seat beside Vince, who'd automatically taken the driver's position. Greer sat in back with her laptop and camera, already pulling up the map. It was 9:30, 2.5 hours before Nathaniel's deadline. Highway 82 cut west through landscape that looked like something from a tourism poster. Mountain peaks still heavy with snow, valleys beginning to green with early spring, houses that probably cost millions tucked into the hillsides, all glass and natural wood, and the kind of architectural ambition that came from having money to burn. At mile marker 12, they turned onto Forest Service Road 314. The pavement ended immediately. The road became packed dirt, rutted from winter, with patches of mud where snow had melted and not yet dried. The truck handled it easily, bouncing over ruts that would have destroyed Greer's Civic. They climbed. The road switchbacked up the mountainside, each turn revealing more dramatic views. Aspen disappeared behind them. The valley spread out below. They were alone up here, surrounded by pine forest and the vast, indifferent silence of mountains. 4 miles in, Greer leaned forward between the front seats. According to the map, we should see the property soon. Next quarter mile on the north side. Thea's heart was hammering. She'd built this up too much in her mind, expected too much. It would be a shack, a ruin, something worth the $847 in annual property taxes and nothing more. They rounded a curve. Thea stopped breathing. The house wasn't a house. It was an impossibility. Rising from the mountainside like something grown rather than built, the structure was almost entirely glass. Not windows in walls, but walls made of glass. Huge panels, each maybe 12 feet tall and 8 feet wide, fitted together with minimal framing. The overall shape was organic, following the natural contour of the slope. 3 levels, each one stepping back from the one below, creating terraces. The glass reflected the sky, the trees, the mountains, so perfectly that the buildings seemed to disappear and reappear depending on the angle of view. The architecture was impossible for 1981. This was the kind of design you saw in contemporary architectural magazines. Cutting-edge environmental integration, structural glass technology that shouldn't have existed 43 years ago. Greer was making small sounds of disbelief, her hands pressed against the truck window like a child seeing Christmas lights. That's not possible. The engineering required for that much structural glass in 1981, the thermal properties alone. Oh my God. Oh my God. Vince pulled the truck into a small clearing that served as parking area. The 3 of them sat there, staring. Up close, the house was even more staggering. The glass panels were pristine,
No cracks or damage visible. The metal framing was weathered but intact, a bronze color that had aged to green patina. The entire structure seemed to float, cantilevered over the slope in a way that defied Thea's understanding of how buildings stayed standing. The entrance was at ground level, a door of the same massive glass panels. Beside it, a modern security panel with a slot for the keycard. They got out of the truck. The air was thin, sharp with pine and altitude. 10,000 feet, maybe more. Thea felt dizzy. From the elevation, from the impossibility of what she was seeing, from the realization that Vera had left them something beyond comprehension. Greer was already walking the perimeter, taking photos with her phone, muttering technical terms Thea didn't understand. Load-bearing capacity, thermal expansion joints, photochromic coating. Vince stood at the entrance, keycard in hand. His engineer's brain was probably doing what Thea's teacher's brain was doing, trying to catalog the impossible, trying to make sense of something that shouldn't exist. He slid the keycard through the reader. A series of beeps. A click. The massive glass door swung inward on silent hinges. They stepped inside. The interior was a cathedral of light. Every wall was glass. The ceiling was glass. Even parts of the floor were glass, revealing the structure beneath. The effect was of standing inside a prism, light fragmenting and multiplying until it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The space was open plan. Living area, kitchen, library, all flowing together without traditional walls. The furniture was minimal, mid-century modern, all organic shapes and natural materials. Teak wood, leather, stone, everything chosen to complement the glass rather than compete with it. And everywhere, on every surface, were signs of Vera's life. Books stacked on shelves that lined the few solid walls. Art supplies in the studio area. Canvases, paints, brushes dried but still arranged as if waiting for the artist to return. A record player with albums scattered beside it. Personal objects that made this more than architecture, made it someone's home. But it was the art that stopped Thea's heart. Paintings hung on the solid sections between glass panels. Original oils in frames that looked museum quality. Thea wasn't an art expert, but she'd taught high school literature for 34 years. She knew enough to recognize names. There, in the living area, what looked like an early Rothko. In the library space, something that might be a Kandinsky. Near the kitchen, a collection of smaller works in a style Thea associated with the abstract expressionists. Greer had gone very still. Her face had lost all color. Mrs. Ashford. Mr. Ashford. These paintings. If they're real, what? If they're real, you're standing in millions of dollars of art. The words hung in the glass-filled space. Millions. The kind of number that belonged to other people's lives. The kind of number that appeared in news articles about auctions and estates, and things so far from Thea's reality, they might as well have been fiction. She walked closer to the Rothko. It was maybe 4 feet tall, 3 feet wide, horizontal bands of color that seemed to pulse with interior light. Orange, red, deep purple. She'd seen Rothko reproductions in books. This didn't look like a reproduction. How did she afford this? Thea's voice came out whisper thin. A reclusive artist who disappeared from public life in the 60s? How did she have this kind of collection? Greer was photographing everything with her phone. Her hands shook slightly. Vera exhibited at the Whitney in '67. That was a big deal. What if she didn't just collect art? What if she knew these artists, bought directly from them before they became famous? A Rothko in the 50s might have cost a few $100s. Now it could be worth 10, 20 million. The number was too big. Thea's brain couldn't process it. She'd spent 4 months counting pennies, had split one coffee with a stranger yesterday, had $1,267.84 in her purse. 10 million was a number from a different universe. They spent the morning exploring, found a generator in a utility room, still functional, found water tanks fed by a mountain spring, still full, found a heating system that was sophisticated for the 80s, using geothermal exchange, found solar panels on the south-facing roof that Greer said were decades ahead of their time, found a house that should have been impossible, but was somehow real. At 11:30, Vince's phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. Just a photo. Nathaniel standing in front of a courthouse with Clarissa beside him. Both of them in expensive clothes, professional smiles, looking like responsible adult children concerned about their elderly parents' welfare. 30 minutes, Vince showed Thea the photo. They'll file in 30 minutes. Let them file. Thea heard her own voice, hard and certain. We're not going back. They sat on the terrace outside, looking out at mountains that stretched forever. Greer made sandwiches from supplies Feldman had kindly included with the truck. Bread, cheese, apples. They ate slowly, tasting each bite. 3 people who'd been hungry long enough to know food was never just food. Noon came. Somewhere in Boston, Nathaniel was handing papers to a clerk, filing his petition, starting the legal process that would try to take this away. Try to take everything away. But he didn't know about the house. Didn't know what it was worth. Thought he was fighting for some rustic cabin in the mountains, something easily liquidated and divided. He had no idea what Vera had really left them. That afternoon they began making the glass sanctuary habitable. The house had been closed for 15 years, but Vera's property management company had kept it sealed and dry. No water damage, no animal intrusion, just dust and stale air. They opened windows, glass panels that slid on tracks so smooth they might have been installed yesterday. Mountain air poured in, cold and clean, carrying the scent of pine. Greer found the mechanical systems, figured out how to restart them. The generator coughed to life. Lights came on. Water began flowing. The house woke up. By evening, they had 3 bedrooms ready. Thea and Vince took the master on the 2nd level, a room with 3 glass walls and a view that made Thea's throat tight. Greer took a smaller room on the same level, already filling it with her architecture books and drafting supplies. After dinner, pasta from Feldman's Supplies, the first real meal they'd cooked in months. Greer pulled out her laptop, showed them what she'd found during the afternoon. Property values in Aspen, recent sales of comparable homes. None were truly comparable. Nothing else like Vera's glass sanctuary existed, but the numbers were staggering. Even a modest estimate put the house's value at $8 million. $10 million if you factored in the unique architecture. More if the art was authentic. The art, Greer's voice was careful. We need to have it authenticated. I've been researching. There are specialists who can verify provenance. If even half of what's here is real, we're talking about a lot of money. How much is a lot? Greer pulled up an auction record. A Rothko sold for $50 million last year. Granted, that was a major work, but even a minor Rothko goes for 10, 15 million. If Vera has 3 or 4 authentic pieces from major artists, we could be looking at, her fingers flew across the calculator, $100 million, maybe more. The number was obscene. Thea started laughing, couldn't help it. 4 months ago, they'd been living in their car. Yesterday, they'd split a coffee because they couldn't afford 2. Now a 26-year-old architecture student was telling them they might own $100 million in art. The laughter turned into something else. Tears. Thea found herself crying, great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep. Vince wrapped his arms around her, his own eyes wet. They held each other in Vera's glass house, while Greer tactfully went to her room, giving them privacy for their breakdown. It was too much, too fast, too impossible. Yesterday they'd had nothing. Today they had everything. Tomorrow Nathaniel would find out and try to take it. Vince's voice was rough against her hair. We're going to fight him, whatever it takes. This is ours. Vera left it to us. We're not letting him take it. That night, Thea couldn't sleep despite the comfortable bed, despite the safety of locked doors and a security system. She got up, wrapped herself in one of Vera's robes she'd found in the closet, went downstairs. The house at night was different. The glass walls that were invisible during the day became mirrors in the dark, reflecting the interior lights, creating the illusion of infinite space. Thea felt like she was floating in a constellation, surrounded by her own reflections, reaching into forever. She found a small office on the second level. Desk, filing cabinets, corkboard covered in notes and sketches. In the desk drawer, 5 leather-bound journals. Vera's handwriting. The same elegant script from the letter. The first entry was dated March 1981. I've bought the land. 17 acres on Glacier View Road. Far enough from town that no one will bother me. High enough that I can see forever. I told Marcus what I want. A house made of light. A place where I can paint and collect and exist without the world's judgment. He thinks I'm crazy. He's probably right, but he's going to build it anyway. Thea read through months of construction, Vera documenting every decision, every challenge. The glass panels shipped from Germany because American manufacturers said the size was impossible. The foundation drilled into solid rock. The first winter when the heating system failed and Vera nearly froze before they solved it. The triumph when the house was finished and she spent her first night sleeping in a room made of stars. One entry from 1993 made Thea stop. I saw Vincent and Theodora today. Not in person, obviously, but I have someone who sends me information about William's descendants. Vincent is doing well at Boeing. Theodora just won some teaching award. They've been married 20 years, 3 children. They look happy in the photograph. I wonder if they remember meeting me at that anniversary party. Probably not. I was already strange by then, already withdrawing. But I remember them, young and earnest, and so clearly in love. The kind of love I never got to have publicly. The kind of love worth protecting. Thea's vision blurred. Vera had been watching them, following their lives, seeing something in their marriage that resonated with her own hidden life. Had chosen them not randomly, but deliberately, recognizing people who understood what it meant to build something worth protecting. She showed Vince the entry in the morning. They sat on the terrace while Greer made breakfast inside, the glass walls turning the kitchen into a stage set.
She knew us. Vince's voice was rough. Chose us. Because she thought we'd understand what she built here. Do we? Vince looked out at the mountains, at the valley spreading below them, at the vast, indifferent beauty of a landscape that didn't care about human troubles. I'm starting to. Saturday they drove into Aspen for supplies. Food, cleaning supplies, basic necessities. The town on a weekend morning was performatively wealthy. People in $1,000 athletic wear buying organic produce. Tourists with ski equipment heading to late-season slopes. Money moving casually, thoughtlessly. Thea felt the eyes on them. 3 people who didn't fit. An elderly couple in thrift store clothes, a young woman with architecture textbooks. They loaded groceries into Feldman's borrowed truck and generated the particular quality of attention that poor people get in rich places. At the hardware store, the clerk made conversation. You folks new to Aspen? Inherited some property, Vince kept it vague.
Out on Glacier View Road. The clerk's eyebrows rose. Which property? 14 Glacier View. The clerk's expression shifted. The Glass Mountain place? Vera's house? Everyone knows about it. Legendary around here. Crazy artist lady who built that impossible house back in the 80s. No one's seen inside it in decades. They paid and left quickly. In the truck, Vince's jaw was tight. People know about the house.
Know about Vera's connection to the art world. How long before Nathaniel hears the rumors? That evening, Greer called Howard Feldman, explained about the conservatorship petition, about Nathaniel tracking them. Feldman was quiet for a long moment. The petition was filed in Iowa, but the property is in Colorado, different jurisdiction. If they want to claim any interest in the estate, they'll need to file in Colorado probate court. That takes time. Gives us room to work.
What should we do? Establish permanent residency immediately. Driver's licenses, voter registration, bank accounts. Make it clear this is your primary residence. Makes it harder for Iowa courts to claim jurisdiction. And I'll contact someone, a colleague who specializes in elder law. You're going to need legal protection. Sunday morning, Feldman called back. I reached her, Dr. Sloan Merrick. She specializes in defending against conservatorship abuse.
She'll be at your property tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Be ready. She works fast. Monday morning arrived with clouds building over the mountains. Thea woke to the sound of vehicles on the access road. 3 of them. Through the glass walls, she watched them approach. Her heart hammered. The first was a beat-up Subaru. It parked, and a woman stepped out. 50-something. Professional clothes, worn, but quality. She carried a briefcase that looked like it had been through wars. The second and third vehicles were what Thea had feared. A black Range Rover, a news van. Nathaniel had brought an audience. Dr. Sloan Merrick reached the house first, shook hands with Thea and Vince. I'm here to help. Howard briefed me. Your son filed conservatorship papers Friday. I've already filed a response, but he's here now, so let me handle this. Nathaniel stepped out of the Range Rover with Clarissa and a man in a suit. The news camera was rolling, recording everything. Mom? Dad? Nathaniel's smile was professional warmth. We've been worried sick. This property is quite remarkable. We had no idea. Which is why we're here. To help. To make sure you're not taken advantage of. The suited man stepped forward. Gregory Marsh, counsel for the Ashford family. We've filed a petition in Colorado probate court requesting assessment of this estate. Given the potential value, we believe professional management is needed. We don't need a conservator. Thea's voice was steady. We're perfectly capable of managing our own affairs. Are you? Nathaniel gestured at the glass house. You've been homeless, living in a church. You have massive debt, and now you've inherited what appears to be a multi-million-dollar property. Mom, Dad, this is beyond what elderly people can handle alone. Clarissa spoke, her voice soft. We're not trying to take this from you. We're protecting the family legacy. If there's valuable art here, it needs proper management. We've already contacted Sotheby's. We're not selling, Vince stepped forward. This was left to us, not to the family, to us. Sloan moved between them and Nathaniel. Her voice carried across the clearing. Gregory, interesting seeing you here. I've opposed you before. Patterson Estate, Randolph Estate. Both times, judges found your conservatorship petitions were motivated by financial gain. Both times denied. Gregory's face went tight. Those cases had different circumstances, did they? Or were they just different elderly people whose children wanted their money? Sloan pulled out papers. I filed a response, including testimony from treating physicians confirming competency, evidence that the Iowa petition was improperly filed, given Colorado residency,
and a counter-petition for sanctions based on your pattern of predatory filings. Nathaniel's composure cracked. Our parents are not competent. They're living in a glass house with some homeless girl, making decisions about hundreds of millions. They need protection. From you. Sloane's voice was sharp. They need protection from you. You lost their savings, foreclosed their home, abandoned them 31 months. Now that they've inherited something, suddenly you're concerned? That's not what happened, Clarissa tried. You knew. Sloane pulled out more papers. Hospital records showing calls during surgery. Phone logs showing dozens of attempts to reach you. The returned letter. You knew. You chose not to respond. Until they had something you wanted. The news camera captured all of it. This isn't over. Nathaniel's voice was dangerous. We have rights. Legal standing. Leave. Vince's voice carried absolute authority. Get off our property. Actually, you don't have rights here. Sloane held up a document. Restraining order. Granted this morning by Judge Hammond, prevents you from coming within 500 feet of your parents or their property. Violate it, and you'll be arrested. Nathaniel stared at the paper, at Sloane, at his parents. The realization that he'd lost this round was visible on his face. Fine. We'll see you in court. He got back in the Range Rover. Clarissa followed. They left, the news van trailing behind, camera still rolling. Sloane turned to them. That went better than expected. Now, let's talk about what comes next. What comes next was Dr. Elena Vasquez arriving Tuesday with a team from the Denver Art Museum. She spent 3 days examining every piece in the house. The Rothko was authenticated. Real. Worth approximately $15 million. The Kandinsky. Authentic. $12 million. Piece after piece verified as genuine. But it was Wednesday when they found the vault. Greer had been studying the architectural drawings she'd discovered. Noticed a discrepancy in the measurements.
The lower studio level wasn't the lowest. There was space below it. 1,500 square feet unaccounted for. They searched the studio. Thea found it behind one of Vera's paintings. A small keyhole. The brass key fit. A section of wall swung inward. Stairs descended into darkness. Howard Feldman came immediately when they called. Brought Walter Kowalski, the locksmith who'd installed Vera's security systems in 2003. Walter was 78, sharp-eyed, carrying a worn leather tool bag. The vault door at the bottom required a code and biometric authorization. Walter examined it. The keypad still works. Code is 673981. June 73. Vince's voice was quiet. Our wedding date. Walter entered the code, pulled out a master override key Vera had given him, turned it 90 degrees. The vault door opened. Inside was a museum. 30 feet deep, 20 wide, climate-controlled. The walls lined with more art than they'd seen upstairs. De Kooning, Pollock, Frankenthaler, Motherwell, an entire wall of abstract expressionist masterworks. And in custom archival boxes, Vera's own work. Hundreds of pieces. The complete artistic output of a woman who'd withdrawn from the world but never stopped creating. Dr. Vasquez made sounds that weren't quite words. Her camera clicked constantly. This isn't a collection. This is one of the most significant private holdings of mid-century American art in existence. Filing cabinets held provenance documentation, purchase receipts, letters from artists, authentication certificates. Everything needed to prove authenticity. How much? Thea whispered. Vasquez didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was careful. Conservative estimate? $265 million. Possibly more. The number hung in the climate-controlled air. Real. Verified. Theirs. The legal battle lasted 6 weeks. Nathaniel fought hard, filed motions, brought in expert witnesses claiming Thea and Vince were incompetent, argued that Sullivan line assets should be divided among all descendants. But Sloane was fiercer. She brought doctors who testified to Thea and Vince's mental acuity, brought evidence of Nathaniel's financial abuse, brought the news footage of his confrontation at the house showing his true motivations. Judge Patricia Hammond heard the case. She was 68, a former public defender with strong feelings about adult children who exploit their parents. Her ruling came on April 28th. The conservatorship petition is denied. Mr. and Mrs. Ashford have demonstrated clear competency. The inheritance is theirs, free and clear, as Mrs. Sullivan Blackwood intended. Furthermore, I'm issuing permanent restraining orders against Mr. Nathaniel Ashford and Miss Clarissa Ashford Pemberton, and I'm ordering them to pay all court costs and attorney fees. She looked directly at Nathaniel. Sir, you should be ashamed. These people gave you life, gave you everything, and you repaid them with abandonment and greed. Get out of my courtroom. That evening, Thea and Vince sat on their terrace watching the sunset. Greer was inside making dinner. Walter Kowalski had stopped by with a bottle of wine to celebrate. Howard Feldman had called to congratulate them. Sloane had promised to come visit once she'd finished filing the final paperwork. What do we do with it? Thea asked. $265 million. What do we do? Vince took her hand, the same hand he'd been holding for 51 years. We do what Vera did. We protect it, use it, make it mean something. They established the Vera Sullivan Blackwood Foundation 3 months later. Its mission? To provide housing, health care, and legal support for abandoned elderly people and LGBTQ+ youth experiencing homelessness. The kind of people society discarded. The kind of people Vera had identified with. The kind of people they'd been. The glass house became the foundation's headquarters, but Thea and Vince lived there too, in the master bedroom with 3 glass walls and views that never got old. Creer finished her architecture degree online, became the foundation's director of programs. Walter joined the board, brought his locksmith expertise to securing emergency housing units. They kept $20 million for themselves, enough to live comfortably, fund medical care, never worry about counting pennies again. The rest, $245 million, went to the foundation, to art programs, to housing, to legal aid, to making sure no one else had to sleep in a church basement, or live in their car, or choose between medication and food. Elliot came to visit 6 months after the court ruling, alone, nervous, carrying a letter he'd written and rewritten a dozen times. I don't expect forgiveness, he told them on the terrace. I just wanted you to know I'm volunteering at a homeless shelter now, trying to become the person I should have been, trying to understand what I let happen. Thea looked at her youngest son, saw genuine remorse, saw the beginnings of the man he might become if he kept working at it. You can't undo the past, she said. But you can choose different from here. That's all any of us can do. It wasn't absolution, but it was a door cracked open. Possibility maintained. Nathaniel and Clarissa never came, never called, never acknowledged what they'd done. But the restraining orders held. The foundation flourished. And Thea and Vince built the life Vera had imagined for them when she'd chosen them 50 years earlier. 2 years after they'd inherited the glass sanctuary, on a cold March morning much like the one when this had all begun, Thea stood on the terrace, watching the sunrise. Vince was inside making breakfast. Greer was in her office planning a new housing development. The foundation had just helped its 1,000th person. She thought about Vera, about the aunt she'd met once and barely remembered, about the woman who'd built a fortress of light to protect herself, then left it to 2 people she barely knew, because she recognized in them the the same need for sanctuary. The beauty is not in the having, but in the seeing, Vera had written. Thea understood now. The glass house, the art, the money, none of it mattered as much as what it enabled. The seeing, the protecting. The understanding that sometimes the family you need isn't the one you're born into, but the one that finds you when you've lost everything else. Vince came out carrying 2 cups of coffee. Real coffee. Good coffee. The kind they could afford now, but that tasted better because they remembered when they couldn't. He handed her a cup, kissed her forehead, looked out at the mountains with her. 53 years of marriage now. 53 years of holding on. Ready for today? He asked. Always, she said, as long as you're here. Because that was the real inheritance, not the glass house or the millions or the foundation helping thousands. It was this. 2 people who'd refused to let the world break them, who'd stayed together when it would have been easier to break apart, who'd been given a second chance and used it to help others find their own. The sun climbed higher. The glass walls caught the light and scattered it into 1,000 pieces. And Theodora and Vincent Ashford, who'd once had nothing but each other, stood in their sanctuary and watched the day begin. Together, the way they'd always been, the way they'd always be.